Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Janet Kellough, and I'm just this writer person who's been asked to come along and be in conversation with our author today, Vicki Delany. And this is all part of the Women Killing It Crime Writers Festival. And I thought I'd just give you just a little bit of a background on what that is. It was started in 2017 as a showcase for women authors who are writing in the crime genre. And that includes a huge number of subgenres, everything from police procedural to cozy, to paranormal suspense, to true crime. It just kind of goes on and on and on, but it was inclusive of all of those particular subgenres.
And true crime as well.
I said true crime.
Oh, did you?
I did. There's an echo in here. So Wiki made a real effort to include as many varieties of crime writing as we could possibly find. We also tried to make it as diverse as possible and as geographically diverse as possible, because everything tends to be kind of Toronto centric. So we really tried to get away from that. I think probably the most important thing we did was we made a decision to not concentrate on authors from big houses. So we might have one or two, but we would also include those authors who publish with small publishers or micro publishers or even self-published. So it was a very inclusive kind of thing. Really, the only criteria for inclusion was that you were a woman writer and that you had a recently published book.
Canadian woman writer, right?
A Canadian, generally a Canadian woman writer, yeah. The initial response was kind of interesting. We heard some sputters from male authors who sort of said, oh, well, can I be included in the lineup if I show up in a dress? And since no woman ever has been included in an all-male lineup anywhere just because she showed up in trousers, the answer was no. Wiki actually garnered quite a lot of attention on a national level. And we were rolling along quite nicely. And then, of course, COVID hit.
We had a fabulous lineup for 2020.
Oh, it was a heartbreaker to have. We had to cancel. And so, you know, we had 2 years of nothing. And when it came time to talk about starting it up again, our organization was like,
You're looking at it.
at the most 4 or 5 people. You're basically looking at it, and we'd lost all of the momentum. We'd lost some money, when we canceled, and the thought of trying to get it going again, it was just really, really daunting. And just almost by accident, the subject sort of came up with the Prince Edward County Library, and I said, I don't think we're going to do anything. You want to take it over? And they said yes. And so it was just, the festival can now go forward, and there are some resources behind it. And that is why we are here today. So I really want to say thank you to all the library people who jumped on board with this and are helping to make it happen again. So I am here today with Vicki Delany, who is a U.S. national bestseller author. She has written over 40 books now, or are you closer to 50? Closer to 50 at this point. And that includes series like the Sherlock Holmes Bookshop series, the Lighthouse Library series, the Tea by the Sea series, the Year-Round Christmas series, the Smith and Winter series, the Klondike Gold Rush, several standalone books, and a number of novellas for adult literacy, which have sort of simplified language and encourage reading with people who have literacy issues. Okay, so I'm always in favor of kind of a give and take kind of discussion. So I'm not going to leave questions to the end here. So if as we go along, you have a question, just stick up your hand and we'll deal with it and we'll see where we end up this afternoon. So, Vicki,
Yes, Jen.
when did you start writing and why did you choose crime writing?
Okay, tell my story. So I started writing when my career is in computers. I was a computer programmer way back in the very beginning. I programmed in COBOL on paper, and we punch carded and all that. So that was my career for a long time. The young man here looks very interested in that. I'm happy to talk about that. And I ended my career working for the World Bank as a systems analyst. But I found that it's partly technology was moving so fast. It's not that I couldn't keep up, it's that I didn't really want to keep up. Plus, I'm not a team player by any means. I really enjoyed the computer business where it was you and your own little project and worked on all by yourself. And as things got bigger and more complex, particularly in the bank, became a very much bigger effort and complex. And anyway, the point is I wasn't enjoying. I loved my early years in computer business. Absolutely loved it. And I didn't think it wrong. So I was working for the bank and I was thinking, I'm not happy with this. What could I do? Well, maybe I'll try writing a book. So I have 3 children. So I thought maybe I could write for children. So I started taking a course at Sheridan College, night course, adult education course at Sheridan College. And I kind of quickly decided I didn't want to write for children, but I was enjoying this class I was in. So I thought, well, I have to keep writing something to bring to the class. I read mystery novels. I'll try my hand at a mystery novel. So it all went from there.
So your first series, was that the Smith and Winter
It was my
series?
first series. I had 2 standalones published before that.
Okay,
Scare the Light Away and Burden of Memory.
okay.
Those are a standalone, sort of what's called domestic suspense. Now the sort of thing that's hugely popular right now. So I kind of was ahead of the curve, right? And there's dual storyline where there's something that happened in the past that's affecting events of today. And in order to resolve people from today, in order to resolve whatever their problem is, they have to come to some conclusions and sort out what happened in the past. So I wrote those 2 standalones. And then my publisher said, why don't you try to stand in the series? Because series are really popular these days. That's what everybody wants to read. So I wrote the 8 books in the Constable Molly Smith series.
Okay, and that's a police procedural?
Police procedural set in the small town of Trafalgar, British Columbia, which is actually Nelson, BC in disguise.
Okay. And do you want to just maybe outline what makes a book a police procedural?
Oh, police procedural is basically exactly what it is, following police characters in the performance of their duties, right? So the case that comes to them is because someone's died or something has happened and they phone the police arrive and go from there. Police procedurals used to be hugely popular. In any sort of, right, any sort of popular culture, things come and keep go. Police procedurals seem to me to be becoming less and less popular all the time, whereas now domestic suspense is on the way up, but it'll all shift again. So police procedural basically have police officers. There's a lot of TV shows that are police procedurals, right? And usually there's a lot to do with the family life of your main characters too, either family life where they conflict with people on the job. So there's lots of interpersonal dynamics and all that sort of stuff. But at the heart of it, it's police doing what police do in real life, and that would be a police procedure.
So from there, you took kind of a veer and you went into the Klondike.
Yes,
series
yes.
From there, which is historical mystery.
Historical mystery set in 1989 or 1889 in the muddy streets of Dawson City during the Great Klondike Gold Rush.
So what led you to that?
I wrote that because I guess I had read probably Richard Burton's great book on the Klondike Gold Rush, as well as others. And it just popped into my head that it was such an amazingly fascinating time. And it really was. Now, there were 4 books in that series. And I stopped it because I got other things, but in real life, it was just an amazing time populated with these unbelievable characters doing unbelievable things. And I thought it would just be a great place. So I started that. I'd really like to set a book there. And it all sort of came together from that. The main character owns a saloon and a dance hall. She's a lady with a mysterious past. She has a 12-year-old son that sort of is incredibly curious as he wanders the streets of
Dawson at this fabulous time. There's the, you know, the handsome Mountie who's big white dog. No cliches were avoided in that series.
So when and why did you switch to cozies? And just before we get into that, can you just talk a little bit about what makes a cozy?
First of all, I'll say it because after I wrote the 2 standalones in the Molly Smith series and the Klondike series, and then I wrote one more standalone, which is the only book I've written other than actually one of my novellas that is set in Prince Edward County, called More Than Sorrow. And it is set contemporary in Prince Edward County and has a backstory of the loyalist settlers to the county. So it's a domestic suspense sort of thing as well, More Than Sorrow. So a cozy, so the good question is, what is a cozy mystery? A cozy mystery is often defined as something without any graphic sex or violence. I believe it has to go a lot further than that. You can write a really dark novel with no graphic violence or sex in it. Right, it's all psychological despair, and you know, and all that angst and despair and all that kind of stuff. So cozy goes much further than that. Cozy is, as the name suggests, fairly light, not to be taken terribly seriously. At the heart of a cozy, I feel that there's no real tragedy in people's lives. It's about people who live in a nice community, the kind of community that you would like to live in. They have a good circle of friends. They have a nice job. Yeah, they have, you know, hiccups in their lives, as we all do. And something happens that disturbs the peace of the community, which is usually a murder, right? So it's up to our protagonist, probably with the help of her friends or her family or something like that, to solve the mystery in order to put the community back to rights, so that once again it becomes this really pleasant place full of happy people. So the death of the whoever it is not usually a tragedy in the sense, because it's usually somebody who is new to the town or a stranger or somebody nobody knows very well or somebody nobody likes very much. And in one of the Constable Molly Smith series, she says to a senior police officer, she says, when I decided to join the police, I knew that I have to face the hard things in life, you know, traffic accidents, abused children, murdered women. But that's not the worst of it. Is it the worst of it's the sheer tragedy of some people's lives. So in a cozy, there's none of that sheer tragedy. And at the end, everything's all resolved and goes on. So a cozy mystery is also very much a puzzle mystery, which is also what a traditional mystery is. So you think of a traditional mystery, Agatha Christie, Miss Marple, Dorothy L. Sayers, that kind of thing. A puzzle mystery whereby the author, it's almost a game of wits between the author and the reader. The author lays down the clues in such a way that the astute reader has a chance to arrive at the conclusion at or shortly before the protagonist does. So the clues must all be there and they must all be fair. So it's up to the author to hide all that. You've got to hide the visible clues, throw up red herrings and different paths to go on and subplots that, just confuse things and that sort of thing. So that's what a real genuine puzzle mystery is, and that's what I consider a cozy to be.
I have always wondered why the designers of cozy mysteries always put a cat on the cover
Or a dog.
or a dog on the cover.
Or a dog. Pets are
Is that
really
a signal?
important.
Is that like a secret hidden kind of signal to the reader that this is?
The cover itself pretty much indicates that it's a cozy, right? It's going to be brightly colored. There's quite often going to be books or cake. Cakes are very popular.
Food is
Food
big
is
in cozies, yeah.
So that's all that part of wanting to be someplace where you want to be, right? Wouldn't we all like to own a tea room and overlooking the ocean and all that stuff? I don't know, probably not either. And cats and dogs appeal to cozy readers. So that is a big clue that that it is a cozy, yes.
So why did you
Why did I
go
switch?
switch from police procedural and so forth and decide to start writing?
So I'll
cozies?
tell you the story of how it came about. So one of my daughters is a paramedic for the city of Toronto, and before she worked for Toronto, she lived for a year and a half in the Turks and Caicos. She was working there as a paramedic. And some of the stories she had to tell were quite funny. Fish out of water, right? This girl from Toronto was living in this country with a permanent population. The entire country is 30,000 people. She's been to concerts with more than the population of this country, right? And then you have this huge tourist thing. So a lot of sort of fish out of water stories that she had to tell. And funny things that they had like one ambulance. What do you do when the ambulance is broken? Which did happen, right? That kind of stuff. And they had to get an SUV from somebody, you know, borrow something to take this person to the hospital. Who turned out, which is sort of a funny story, is this big shot American lawyer, and they're bundling this person in the back of the car and stuffing her into the SUV, bouncing down the road, worried about lawsuits the whole way. But anyway, so that kind of story. So I thought that would be funny. Write a nice, light, funny series. Exactly. So I came up with a proposal. A normal proposal is like an outline and then 3 or 4 chapters of the book. So I sent that to my very good friend, somebody you know quite well, Mary Jane Maffini.
Mhm.
And I asked her if she would show this to her agent. So she did that, and her agent wrote back to me and said that she really liked it, but she wouldn't be able to place
No,
it.
wait. First, the agent said, who is Mary Jane Maffini? I'm sorry, that was just an editorial comment.
Okay, actually, it did work in this case. It
Okay,
worked well.
okay.
So the agent said she really liked it, but she wouldn't be able to place it. So okay, fine, I thought that was an idea. I'll put it aside. And I actually started working on a standalone set on a winery in Prince Edward County, which never came to fruition because I then, a couple of months after that, got an email from this agent saying that she had a proposal from Penguin that we're looking for somebody to write the Lighthouse Library series, and would I be interested in that?
Okay.
So I wrote that series, started that series under the pen name of Eva Gates. And those books are what's called work for hire, which is much more common than people realize. A work for hire is, as in this case, they were looking for somebody to write the Lighthouse Library series. That means they had come up with the idea. So they had the very rough idea, the location, the Body Island Lighthouse, Outer Banks, North Carolina, where it is in a library. The librarian arrives from Boston. That's kind of the sole what they had, but they own the copyright to it. That's why it's called work for hire. And that's why I use a pen name, because they also own the authors.
So you just fleshed out their bare bones.
That's right.
ideas.
Yeah, that's right. So I took their idea and built it into it and started the series. Now, what happened there, so we will digress, is they dropped the series after 3 books, and it's almost unknown for them to give copyright to an author. But they did for me.
Oh,
So they gave it to me. I always say back to me, but I never had it in the first place. So they gave it to me. So I was able to take the series to Crooked Lane, which is why it continues to be published by another publisher.
so why did they drop it and why did you like continue? Or was it just because it was so popular? I mean, I enjoyed the book, so.
Well, what happened actually with that is what's called in the cozy fandom as the Great Cozy Massacre. If you remember, you probably don't, maybe it was 10 years ago, probably less than that. Random House and Penguin merged to make Penguin Random House.
Oh,
So the way the story was sort of explained to me is that Random House was all about big bestsellers, big books promoting big bestsellers, whereas Penguin was more about having a solid mid list. So when the two joined, Penguin basically had to get rid of a lot of their mid list, which they did. They dropped something like 70% of the series, the cozy, not just cozy series, but other sort of series that they were running. They laid off an enormous. I had 4 editors in the course of a couple of months because my editor kept leaving, and they'd say, well, we've lost her. Here's Jane, and 2 weeks later, Jane would be gone, and then I'd have somebody else. So they lost a lot of staff and a lot of books. A lot of series went. So that's why. And it was because, and then so there was a Facebook group that started up called Save Our Cozies, which still exists. And their purpose was to write to Penguin and to protest all of this happening.
okay.
And someone at Crooked Lane saw that my book was being talked about on Save Our Cozy as a book, as a series the readers wanted to see saved. So they said, maybe we could take this on. And that's sort of what happened. So that's the reason why I still write that series under the name Eva Gates. I could have, and we discussed this at Crooked Lane, whether I wanted to start using my own name again, but I thought that would just be too confusing. You can't change the author's name in the middle of the series. So that's why that is. So anyway, so I did, before all that happened, I now have my foot in the door at Penguin Random House. So my agent and I talked about maybe me pitching a second series for them, and that was the Year-Round Christmas series, which surprisingly survived the Great Cozy Massacre, even though the Lighthouse Library series is far more popular. Why that is, I have no idea. It might have been the position it was in the contract negotiation stage or something, but
anyway, so that's what happened. So once I had my foot in the cozy door, I decided that I quite liked it. Actually like writing these books. You know, I've had enough of all that human angst that Molly Smith talked about, right? And
Yeah.
they're light, they're funny, you know, and they're easy for me to write, and so I enjoy doing them. So I kept on. So I now have actually written a total of 5 series. So another thing that has been saved actually is the year-round Christmas series. There were 5 of those published by Penguin Random House, which is normal. 5 books is actually not for a series to be dropped at a mid-list cozy series to be dropped after 5 books is not unusual. So they did drop that. I wasn't too concerned. But then I started the Catskill series, and that series, I hate to say, it was a huge flop. Huge flop. Don't know why. Absolute flop. So they never picked any more up after the next 2. Pretty discouraged. So my agent and I talked about what I could do next. And I said, you know what? I just don't feel like starting something new. Because I was really keen on the Catskill series, right? That was all very new time frame, everything. I had to learn all this stuff. And I said, maybe we can see if another publisher would like the year-round Christmas series. So we did take it to Crooked Lane, and they're carrying on with the year-round Christmas series. So that book will. So the next book in that series will be out next year. Which is a long answer to a short question.
Oh, that's fine.
Can I ask how many
We're-
books there are in the Lighthouse series?
There are 9 published now. There's 9 published now. The 10th will be out in June, and I have 2 more contracted after that. So it's doing great. It's of all my books, it does by far and away the best. Yeah.
The cozy series that actually most intrigues me is the Sherlock bookshop series.
Yes, Sherlock Holmes books.
And it in some respects is kind of a reworking of the whole Sherlock Holmes world, if you like. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how you've incorporated the elements of the Conan Doyle stories into the cozy series?
So the Sherlock Holmes bookshop series, which actually is my favorite. I said the Lighthouse Library is doing the best, but the Sherlock Holmes bookshop is my favorite series. I was thinking, so my first idea was, well, this is a couple years now. I'd like to start a new series, a bookshop. A bookshop owner would be an interesting series. You need in a cozy, you need the kind of a thing where the character can't work like in a bank. Oh, sorry, I'm leaving to solve a mystery. I won't be back for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
It helps if she has her own.
mobile.
Yeah, even with somebody who owns their own business, I've talked to bookshop owners and they tell me that they don't actually run out the door in the middle of the day to solve murders, but you kind of edge around some of this. So I thought, and books in general are very popular with cozy readers, so thought that'd be interesting. And then I thought, well, if I could have a bookshop, I'd like something that has a little bit of a niche. Be fun to work with. Oh, Sherlock Holmes. And then I had started the book, and I was, by the end of page 1, probably the character had become a Sherlockian character, which hadn't really been my intent until I started to write her. So she is Sherlock Holmes. She is my interpretation of Sherlock Holmes as a modern young woman. She has the memory of Sherlock Holmes. She has those deductive abilities. She also has some of the little personality flaws that she can be not entirely polite to people that she doesn't feel are following her thought process well enough. And I find that a lot of fun to do. And you don't have to be, as I keep emphasizing, you don't have to be a Sherlock Holmes fan or devotee to understand these books. There's no hidden plots, plot points or clues taken from any of the Sherlock Holmes books. It's just something that I have fun playing with. There's lots of what we call Easter eggs, meaning little details that people who are in the know will know. Like there's 17 steps in the bookstore between her office and there are 17 steps at 221B Baker Street. The cat's name is Moriarty. The cat hates her. It's friendly to everybody else.
That's what I like.
The cat hates her. And the way I see Moriarty, the cat, is that he's a master criminal trapped in a 10-pound body, right? So what can he do? Little Easter eggs like that. Her sister kind of single-handedly runs the British government.
Yes. And I like her uncle.
Uncle
is
Arthur,
always
great Uncle Arthur.
coming and going, right? Or off on.
Well, he's never coming. Uncle Arthur is actually in the first book, I didn't want to clutter the first book up with too many characters. So I thought we better just have Uncle Arthur away for a few days, you know, and then I'll introduce him again. And then I remember the TV show Frasier? How Niles's wife never ever appeared, constantly talked about, but she never appeared.
Yeah.
So that's what I decided to do with Great Uncle Arthur. He
Right.
will never actually appear, but he's always referred to.
Yes.
So that's all just been fun. And then I also sort of started when I was Thursday, oh, I could make her like the Sherlock Holmes character. That would be really interesting. I thought it'd be hard to do, right? You gotta, you know, she's gotta observe all these things. But it's actually not hard to do if you're the author. Because you're the author, you just create things for her to observe, right? She identifies. Well, she identifies some guy as you know, being with the yacht club because he happens to be wearing a pin with the initials of the yacht club on it, just the same as Sherlock Holmes, right? So I gave him a pin so she can identify it.
So you've just come back from like a Sherlock Holmes conference, right?
Yes.
What is the reaction amongst, you know, the diehard Sherlock Holmes fans to you taking their beloved characters and turning them into something else?
Well, first of all, there's so many Sherlock pastiches these days that it's not the least bit unusual.
Okay.
If you genuinely wanted to have a Sherlock Holmes themed bookstore, it would be easy to do. There's not just the originals, but so much pastiche and knockoffs and imitations like mine there's a lot of legal issues with the Conan Doyle estate, of which the intense Sherlockians have no fondness for. So I think that generally they like mine because they've taken the tone in which it's to be intended, right? And one of the characters in the book is this really intense Donald Morris, this intense Sherlock. You know, he's given up his law practice in order to be to study the great detective, and then he finds out he can't make any money in this discovery of, you know, being a devotee of the great detective, and so I kind of don't want to cross into parody, you know, because there are people who are, but it was explained to me that there's people who are really intensely into Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle. It's an intellectual thing for them to meet with the like-minded, to, you know, have an intellectual discussion about things. I learned a lot this weekend about Conan Doyle's life and that, and it was all I had a great time at this conference. It was really interesting. It was, as an incidental, you can go to the Toronto Reference Library has one of the world's best Conan Doyle collections. It's on the 5th floor at the Toronto Reference Library. You can go in, the books are non-circulating, but you can go in and study them there. The room is set up to look like the study at 221B Baker Street. I did put some pictures of it up on my Facebook page. So as well, they do have originals, and they have magazines, original, not just Sherlock, but other Conan Doyle things. They have originals of the Strand magazine, of the original Mrs. Beeton's, that the first Sherlock Holmes story, which is worth thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I have one of them there. So they have a whole lot of pastiche stuff too, including my books. That's part of the collection. So, and that's free to the public. You're welcome to go in the Toronto Reference Library next time you're there. It's really interesting to see.
So, can we just talk a little bit about the writing process? Mystery writers actually talk a lot about plotters and pantsters. And would you care to explain the difference between a plotter and a pantster?
A pantser means the person who writes by the seat of their pants, as opposed to a plotter who works the plot all out ahead of time. I'm kind of a combination of the two. I will start with an idea that I could explain to you in a sentence, and I'll sit down and I'll start, and I will, you know, just flow from there, and I'll probably write maybe 3 chapters, 4 chapters, maybe as much as up to the murder, and then I stop, and then I plot from then on. Because I find that kind of free form thing at the beginning is where I'm gathering all the people who's going to be the likely murder victim, who's likely the person who did it, who are all the people involved with the red herrings and all that, and the subplots and all that. Get those people kind of in more or less sort of fluidly as they come into it, and then I have to stop, and then I plot the whole thing out. Not in a whole lot of detail, but a reasonable amount of detail. You know, who did it and why and what and how she's gonna, whoever, you know, figure it all out and that kind of stuff. So I kind of do both.
Would that be the same for the standalones as in the cozies too?
It's actually kind of my method has changed a lot. I used to be much more of pantser than I am now. With the earlier books I write, I didn't have any outline at all. But once I got a contract like with Penguin Random House, and even most of the big publishers require, before they'll give you a contract, they require an outline. So once I started writing an outline, I found it worked really well for me. Yeah.
Does the research, if necessary, factor in at that point when you switch from kind of a free form to plotting?
Research kind of, there's couple types of research, right? First, most of the research I do for any of the cozy mysteries is go there. The books are set like in a couple in Cape Cod, one in the Outer Banks that I mentioned. I'd never been to the Outer Banks before I got this contract to write the Lighthouse Library series. And I thought, well, I guess I'd better go down and have a look. So I went on down. So that I would have done beforehand. Some of the research, so the research kind of comes and goes. I'm not very good at doing the research. Stuff like, how to kill people, particularly poisons. I've done a fair amount of research into poison. I'm trying to find the right poison for somebody and all that. When I was writing the Molly Smith books, in one of the Molly Smith books, there's an actual car bomb. A bomb is planted in a car. And I kind of was really nervous about researching how to plant a bomb in a car, right? Because I was afraid I was going on a trip and I was afraid I'd get stopped. My search history. Yeah, anyway, and the other, but the Catskill mysteries required a fair amount of research. So they're set in 1953. So I did a lot of research before I had the idea for the book. So I might have started, I probably did the sort of the fly by the seat of my pants stuff first. And then I stopped and I read. So the researching the Catskill stuff was interesting because it's interesting about 1953. If, for example, you can see movies that were actually made in 1953. If you're doing a book set in Tudor times, you can watch a movie that's set in Tudor times, but you can't watch one that's actually was made in Tudor times, but you can with 1953. So I watched a lot of Fred Astaire dance movies because there's some dance scenes in the ballroom of the hotel. And there's all kinds of information, of course, on what they ate. And, we all remember we did the celery sticks with cheese whiz in it, and at this fancy hotel at their cocktail hour, they have the celery with the cheese, the cheese whiz, and that's all terribly impressive. Stuffed tomatoes, a little bit of tuna in it. Yeah. So the different series require different levels of research. Yeah.
So speaking of going places, one of your adult literacy titles was a book called Juba Good, which was set in South Sudan.
That's right.
And I'm going to give you the opportunity to do a little bit of bragging here.
Okay.
Do you want to tell us why it was set in South Sudan?
It was set in South Sudan because I visited South Sudan. And I bet there's not many people that have ever been tourists in Yao, South Sudan.
I expect not. Nobody here.
South Sudan. One of my daughters is a Canadian diplomat, and she was stationed in South Sudan for 2 years. So I did go there twice. And while I was there, I met, and I hadn't had any intention of doing this, but I met an RCMP officer who was working with the police in South Sudan. So I talked to him at some great length. Just happened to meet him. I was with some of Caroline's friends, and we were going to a game reserve, which is unlike anything you could imagine in terms of its casualness. And on this bumpy road, we see this bumpy jeep coming towards us, and it's full of, I've been to South Sudan, white people, which is not. So that you sort of stop to talk to them, right? Because they're different. That's the only thing. They're different, like you're different. So we stopped, and how are you? Where are you going? Blah, blah. And anyway, it was a bunch of cops from all different countries that were working with the UN, and one of them was the RCMP. So he said to me, after you've finished your expedition, why don't you come to our, where we live and have a chat? So we did that. So that's what it started at all. So I got his number so I could ask him questions and all that. And then I thought that would be really interesting, and it would work well for the novellas because they're much shorter and much more compact. So they turned into a series of 3, one set in South Sudan, one set in Haiti, because one of my daughter's friends was working in Haiti, and I went and visited there, and she introduced me to some RCMP that were working with the police in Haiti. And the third was set in Turks and Caicos because I ran out of contact, I ran out of police in Fragile State. So I took my character to Turks and Caicos on vacation, and he gets involved in human smuggling. And he doesn't get involved in, he gets involved in trying to stop human smuggling. Those are the darkest of any of my books. And they deal with fairly dark material, stuff that I probably didn't really want to go to in a full-length novel, but so it suited the novella thing quite well.
So I was wondering if you would want to go into one of those and expand on it.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say no.
Probably
that's
not, you know, and certainly not now, the darker side of life is.
So
Not
your
for me.
daughter went from there
Okay, so she's asking me
to
to,
Mozambique.
so my daughter, so the same daughter was up until this summer, the Canadian High Commissioner in Mozambique. So I went to Mozambique 6 times over the last 4 years. Just love it, it's just great.
So any plans to sort of incorporate that setting into
Oh, let me
something?
say what she's doing right now.
Okay.
She's the director, so yeah, right now, my daughter's the Director General for Southern and Eastern Africa for the Department of Global Affairs.
Oh, wow.
So she's now in Ottawa. Any plans to incorporate Mozambique? And no, partly because it doesn't suit the cozy stuff, but also I have no police contacts in Mozambique. And after my daughter started rising up the ladder, she said to me, I could not appear to use anybody that she had put me in touch with.
Okay.
It could appear to be not any
Okay.
suggestion that she had used her influence in order for me to meet people. Now, so I had no contacts in the police in Mozambique. And one of the Sherlock Holmes bookshop series, they go to London.
Mhm.
I have no contacts in the police in London either, but I read so many police
That's
procedurals set in
easy
the
enough to
UK that
know.
I figure I
Yeah.
know which.
Yeah.
And watch TV
Yeah.
shows, right? So
Yeah.
I know it well enough that I can bluff my way through.
Yeah,
Yes.
just dip into a Peter Robinson and you get a right? So what's next?
What's next? I'm just checking along with what I'm doing. Right now, I'm writing the after next year's Sherlock Holmes bookshop series, which has to do with a seance. So I kind of talked a little bit about this past weekend. I was saying that, like, I don't use anything from the Sherlock Holmes books or Conan Doyle's works, meaning you don't have to have read them to solve the clues, but they kind of give me a springboard. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was intensely interested in spiritualism. Really was a lead person in the Victorian era spirit, and I learned lots about that. Apparently he had a huge falling out with Houdini. Houdini wanted nothing to do with him because Houdini didn't believe in any of that stuff, right? Houdini's magic was all based on science and physics, right? He didn't want, so they had a huge falling out. And anyway, so in the book that I'm writing right now, this psychic fair comes to town, and Gemma Doyle wouldn't be caught dead at a psychic fair. But Donald Morris, the keen Sherlockian, wants
Right.
to go,
Yes.
to follow in Sir Arthur's footsteps. So he convinces Gemma to go to a seance with him. So at the seance is where everything sort of happens. So that stuff gives me a springboard. I mean, the idea is seance. That was my idea.
Mhm.
I now start say how I can get her into a seance, right? Which I do. And needless to say, the medium pulls, dead on the table in the middle of the seance as lightning flashes and thunder roars
And his
like
big
crystal
finger
ball.
comes out of the sky.
just about, so that's what I'm working on right now. Next year's year-round Christmas book is finished and got submitted this week.
Congratulations.
And then I'm going to Italy in 3 weeks.
Right.
And I'll start something else when I get back.
Does writing about year-round Christmas, did that affect your relationship with Christmas?
Good question. Very good question. I'm not a year-round Christmas person. I can't imagine anything worse, right? I absolutely, I don't go in the Christmas stores. I don't listen to Christmas music or anything. I put my tree up on the 20th sort of December, right? Because I don't believe it should go after. It doesn't affect my relationship. No, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's just kind of silly and and it's intent, and you asked about the covers. Well, the titles also tell you it's a cozy book. Year-round Christmas mysteries have titles like Rescued Murdered Gentleman. That's not going to be a deep, dark, so it's not going to be a deep, dark dive into the psychology of a serial killer.
Christmas and how evil Saint Nicholas really was. That's my book, right? So, is there anything else you want to talk about that I haven't asked about?
I didn't really think so. I'm gonna end by, well, not end, I'm welcome to answer questions, but I want to ask you what you're working on right now.
I'm working on nothing right now, and it's driving
Well,
me
that's a quick
crazy.
answer.
Okay, I have, I actually have a book coming out, in October, which is basically just, a compilation of all the stories that I told live over the years, because I spent, before I started writing novels, I was basically a performance storyteller. And I used to work a lot with musicians, and we'd sort of weave music and story together. Most of the stories were Prince Edward County based. And I would just, the beginning of the book says, I've spent a huge amount of my life standing up in front of people, telling them stuff. Well, here's the stuff I told you. And the reason for doing that was, some of the stories have been recorded. Some of them appear in other places. Some of them weren't anywhere. They were living in my filing cabinet. And I thought, I should just put all these together, because it's like a snapshot of a particular time in the county. So it's
So that's the
got,
kind of book that, in 50 years from now, people are, I'm gonna set a cozy mystery in Prince Edward County, so I need to do some first.
absolutely. Well, it's got fun crime stuff. Like, it has the story of the hijacking of the Glenora ferry, and it's got the Bloomfield helicopter story. It's got the dead guy in the back of the car story, when he drove around for 12 hours trying to cash his welfare check. And there are shipwreck stories, and just all of the stories that I stuck in front of people and told them over the years. And so that will all be together. And as it turns out, another writer friend of ours, JD Carpenter, completed a book of county poems, and the sort of period of time that he was writing about coincides with a lot of the period that I was writing about. And so when we realized that, we said, let's do a double launch. We'll have county poems and county stories together. So that's at Books and Company on October 23rd. Yeah. Excuse me. Other than that, most of the pandemic I've spent writing a book that was really for me. And it's called The Four Dead Wives of Captain John Platt. And Captain John Platt is fairly well documented. And we're talking time frame, basically late 17th century. And his story kind of goes from England to colonial America, South Carolina, then to New York City. And his life is pretty well documented in terms of what he was involved in. And he was a very colorful character, let's put it that way. And he was married 4 times. And generally speaking, all you get on the 4 wives is daughter of, wife of, mother of.
Yeah.
And this is an ancestor of mine. So I had always been intensely curious about these 4 wives. And because the first wife got plucked out of London and dragged across to South Carolina with little notice, where she promptly died. It goes on and on and on. These women had so little agency in their lives. What were their lives like? And yet, by the time I got to the end of the book, they were fascinating women. I don't know how historically accurate it is, but I had fun with it. I found different voices for all 4 of the women, and different motivations for all 4 of the women, and I think I put together a pretty good story. But holy mackerel, you always say you're no good at research. I love research.
Next
I
time I'll
thought
get you
this-
to do it.
Yeah. I thought this thing was going to kill me, because the research was just so heavy. I mean, I write about Prince Edward County. I don't even have to think about it, right? Because I know the place so well. This was all new stuff for me, geographically, historically, clothing, food.
So there wasn't
whatever.
any nefarious goings on with the death of his wives.
No, it's
Okay.
not.
Mm.
It's not a
Right.
like a murder mystery. No,
Okay.
They died of natural causes, but there's lots of goings on, I'll tell you.
Yeah, did you say that you wrote this more for yourself?
Pardon?
Did you say that you're writing this more for yourself?
This was something I just always wanted to do.
But it sounds like a lot of work and it sounds like it would make a good book.
Oh, it is, it ended up a book, yeah,
Oh, it's been done.
and it's
Oh,
sort of out there
and you're
looking.
Still.
It's looking for a publisher right now.
Yeah.
So she sent that, so,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's hope soon.
Were you ever able to find any tidbits about these women at all in the?
Yeah, it got
wills and who it
like, the more I got into it, the crazier it got. The first wife in particular was really interesting because her father was a dancing master in London. And also, as I subsequently found out, a choreographer at Lincoln's Inn Fields Playhouse in London. He was a member of the Duke's Company. And just trying to figure out how his daughter ended up marrying the son of a sea captain, who became a sea captain himself, was interesting. But she was very young when she married him, and she was probably the most sophisticated of the wives because she grew up in London. The second wife was the granddaughter of one of the guys who was executed because he signed the death warrant for Charles I. The third wife grew up on Block Island, which is this isolated island off Providence, Rhode Island. And her father was one of the original European settlers there, so that was fascinating. And then the fourth wife was born in Stamford, Connecticut, which is the other town that had witchcraft trials. So it was like I started out with almost nothing, but every time I turned around, there were these fascinating bits that I kept finding that kept shoving the story in a different direction. So it was fun. It was really fun. So I'm hoping to get that out too. And
Did you name it?
pardon?
Have you named it?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
called
the
the Four
Four
Dead
Wives,
Wives
yeah,
of Captain John Cobb, yeah.
Mhm.
And I like that title, and it's always,
I think it's a great title.
yeah,
Yeah.
who knows what a publisher will do with it, but
Well, they should like it because there's the 7.5 wives, there's 7 wives of 7 husbands of Evelyn somebody. Hugo is a huge book right now.
yes, yeah.
And the other one that's, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm trying to think of another book title that's similar. It's not coming to me.
So when you write a book, do you get to choose the title or does
It
the
de- it-
publisher
It,
choose?
it depends.
It depends.
Okay,
Because I found, like with my cozy mysteries, I'm not very good at puns. A lot of them have puns. There's 2 types of people in the world, right? Those that love puns and those that hate them, and I'm one of the haters. So I don't come up with the titles of most of my cozy mysteries because I really struggle. My
right,
earlier ones, like More Than Sorrow, that's a line in the book, and I thought there has to be more to life than sorrow. And I thought, well, that would be a great title. That just came to me. But the cozy stuff, no, I'm struggling. Yeah. Oh, and I really like the title needs to kind of reflect the book. So the particular like the cozies, like Tea and Treachery, well, that's about the tea house. Rest Ye Murdered Gentlemen, obviously, year on Christmas series. The Sherlock Holmes bookshop series were way, meaning me and all my friends who I roped into it, and my agent and my publisher are now starting to have a lot of trouble. So we wanted a title that reflects not just a book, not just about books, but about Sherlock Holmes.
Right,
So some kind of a
right.
Sherlock Holmes reference to do
Right.
with books. So I'm really starting to struggle. For the one I'm writing right now, I want books, Sherlock Holmes, and a seance all included in the title. And it has to be light and catchy, so you know that it's a cozy mystery as well. Right? All suggestions are being accepted.
Deadly Seance at Sherlock Holmes Bookshop. That's long.
But keep working.
Yeah.
I'm a bit curious about your reading habits. Early on, you say that you decided you were going to start writing mysteries. Were you always a reader of mysteries? What were your kind of early reading experiences?
I probably was always a reader of mysteries. Certainly I,
I do remember Nancy Drew. I remember the Hardy Boys. I was a gigantic I still am, I shouldn't say what, Lord of the Rings fan. So I've read the Lord of the Rings multiple times. Anybody see last night's episode? So good. Anyway, I don't, so in fact, I don't really read very many mysteries anymore. Which taste change and people's taste change and that sort of stuff. But I still read a few. Now and again. I'm getting ready for this trip to Italy. So I'm reading, actually, I really like reading books set in a place where I'm going. So I've got a bunch of books out. I did a signing at Sleuth Baker Street in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. So I said to her, what do you have that's set in Venice? So, so out they all came. So I am reading Italian set mysteries right now. Yeah.
I always have to take about 4 paperbacks with me to read while I'm away, so.
Which is actually one of the reasons that the books are set in places like Cape Cod and the Outer Banks. The Outer Banks I was given, but the couple of books set in Cape Cod, it's because for 2 reasons. I found that people like me like to read books that are set in places they go on vacation. But also a vacation spot gives the author an opportunity to have a vast turnover of people. In the Tea by the Sea mysteries, her grandmother owns a B&B. Well, that, so I have murder victims, I have suspects, and I have killers can all turn over through the B&B rather than the same small group of people in the same small town all the time.
Yeah, you start wondering, where is this town? I'm never going there.
Murders,
It also allows you to go there and deduct your travel expenses.
Well, see, the Sherlock Holmes bookshop one, when they went to London, there's a murder afoot. Yeah, I went to London on holiday and I deducted some of that from, because I use that in the book. So,
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of the reruns of Murder, She Wrote
oh yes, yeah.
and Cabot Cove.
Cabot Cove was the classic. Nobody would want to go to Cabot Cove. No, never.
No.
And never be friends with Jessica Fletcher.
I never want to go to the
somebody
Caribbean
always
island
does.
where Death in Paradise
Yeah.
is set. Oh, yeah. I'll find myself in the drawing room with the detective. This is awful.
At least you're not the dead person.
Oh, no, that's true. I could be, couldn't I?
Yeah.
I wonder if that hasn't happened yet.
Any more questions? Anything else you'd like us to talk about?
Maybe one other question might be, when you were taking those writing classes at Sheridan, and you decided you were going to start writing, was there an early experience in those writing projects that made you think, well, I might be really good at this, or I enjoy this so much?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because but yeah, I better than everybody else in the class. Kind of embarrassing to say, everybody thinks they're good.
Right.
I'm not being facetious, but when it's true, it's true.
Thank you. Thank you. To a certain extent, everybody, it's you write what I believe the cadence of your voice is what you write. So so that sounds good too, because that's the way you talk, right? So it is, but I think I was enjoying the class. I did pretty well. The teacher said that I actually went all the way through and got a certificate in creative writing because I did enjoy taking classes. And if anybody out there wants any advice, I really believe in taking courses. They're not going to give you talent don't have, but it's going to give you the craft and the skills that you need to be able to focus that talent into, to write dialogue properly, to use proper sentence structure and all that kind of stuff. So I really, appreciate the fact that I was able to take those courses, and I suggest anybody else if you have a chance. There's lots of things available.
I belong to a writing group that meets it's still on Zoom. Occasionally we meet in person, but it's mostly on Zoom Friday afternoons.
Okay,
For a
that's
couple
good.
hours.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's all good.
What kind of
And-
stuff are people writing?
Quite a variety of things. Some people like poetry, which is not my thing, but some people really like that. And some people are writing memoirs. And we have an Indigenous lady from Tyndonega who's writing her memoirs, and she's great. And just all kinds of things.
Because I gave a workshop a couple of weeks ago as part of the Northumberland Festival of the Arts. So I gave a workshop in Brighton on plotting the mystery novel. And like I said to the class, it's almost as if
anything I'm gonna tell you doesn't really even matter. The purpose, I think the purpose of that kind of class is to get people to do it, because like anything else that you don't really have, getting paid for, you don't have a deadline for, it's so easy to let it slip. It's easy to get discouraged if you start running out of ideas and all that. So knowing that you're coming to a class, there are class exercises to do, to take home with you and all that sort of stuff. That all helps, I think, really get people focused again, which I think a lot of workshops, that's really the main focus is to get people to sit down and think about doing it again.
But it's quite interesting because some of the people in our group are excellent. You just enjoy their stories and their writing, and they flow so seamlessly.
Yeah.
And they have such an knack, and others like myself, I struggle, I mean, I can get it done, but I don't think it's still has the same flow in that as some of the other people.
I don't know.
I'm not a natural.
I would kind of dispute that. We all struggle. We all struggle far more than people realize, particularly kind of when you're just starting out and you don't trust yourself. And I've met over the course, part of the things what I talked about these workshops is I've met numerous people when I've done workshops or anything at all who've said, yeah, I've started 4 books, I've started 5 books, but it's just not going there. So now I'm trying another one and it's like this. All writers get into what's called the soggy middle, that you just can't see your way out. You've got this really, really great idea. You start off, you've got a wonderful idea of what's going to happen at the climax, and you have 60,000 words in between that you can't.
Right.
And that's really common, particularly for beginning authors. And by beginning authors, I mean like my first 10 books. Oh, I'll never get through this. And I still feel that sometimes. This is just not working. What am I going to do? Well, just keep on writing and it'll happen.
Well, I've been writing this book. It's finished, except I'm still editing.
Then it's
But-
not finished.
Well, then it's not, no, that's true. But I mean, I have a number of programs open. Well, I have it in front of me, and they're for grammar and editing programs and all that. So I'm always kind of second guessing what I write.
You can
And
also
then-
edit
So
too
I have to
much.
filter it through these things, and then it gives you
Yeah.
a percentage score on
Oh,
how
no.
well.
No.
Absolutely
No,
not.
just
You don't want
stop.
any of that. Yeah.
No, it's only 84%.
No.
You know what would help if you're talking about flow?
Yeah.
What helps more than anything? Read it out loud. And you're gonna
Yeah.
soon discover where the clunky bits are. I started off as a storyteller, okay? All of my stuff was out loud. And it went out there, and when it wasn't working, oh man, you knew it, because the audience was kind of the shift and looking at the reading through, So it's like instant feedback, but I had done it enough that I got an ear for when it was working.
Well,
And a huge amount of that is doing it out loud, because all of a sudden you go,
Yeah.
oh, well, that's a clunky piece of dialogue, because nobody that was difficult for me to say. And nobody would actually say that in real life. So that's a bit I need to go and change. And you can just keep going through and doing that. And I think you might help it, but stay away from those damn programs.
I did have it edited by an editor.
Okay,
And,
what kind of editor?
well, she calls herself an editor.
Okay.
And she's with the Belleville,
Okay,
but when I got it back, I mean, there was so much crossed out. Like, it was really deflating, like the passages that I thought were pretty good and kind of flowed to me.
But did she say why? Did she say what was wrong with those passages, or what she felt was wrong with those passages she crossed out?
Some of it, she said it was too much, almost like stage direction. Okay.
And it's up to you whether you want to,
But
listen to
anyway,
what she
So
says.
I'm just finding writing really difficult, so I'm really impressed with the number of books and everything that you maybe to put out.
I'm not gonna say it gets easier as you go along, but it gets so that you trust the talent.
You trust yourself. You
Mm.
begin to trust yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be writing along, you're going, and you'll know, oh, this is not where this bit is crap. but I need this bridge to get to the next bit, which isn't.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna leave this for right
Yeah,
now.
because I
A
found,
huge amount of writing is in the editing, and I'm not talking about an outside editor. I'm talking about self-editing.
Well, that's where I'm at now.
but you can
and-
also do too much editing, can't you? You can go over it
Yeah,
and
you
over
can.
and
You
over
can
it. At
kill it.
some point, you have to decide that it's the way it is,
Yeah.
right? That you can kill it or never end. Because
They-
it can be
oh,
never, it
yeah.
can be never.
Well,
ending.
this is what happens to a lot of these people who have 4 or 5 different
Yeah.
books. They never end.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's not finished. Well, what you're talking about is not being able to get through the editing process, not the writing process. And yeah, editing takes some self-discipline. But if you look at it and are quite honest about the bits that aren't working.
Mhm.
And very self-laudatory about the bits that are, because that's important too.
Mhm.
And then, you're gonna start to see why the bits that aren't working.
Mhm.
Saying it out loud just
It's
is
a good idea.
Yeah, I
huge
guess
help.
that
It
when I
really is.
finish this end up, that's what I'll do is go into the sunroom and just shut the door.
And stay away from those programs, because that's just gonna
Oh.
drive you crazy. And they're so pedestrian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're talking about a very pedestrian way of writing. And they're not
Okay.
going to recognize
Okay.
things that are the norm, but that nevertheless can be wonderful in a book. I mean, if you look at somebody like John Irving, who admittedly overdoes it sometimes, he will often just repeat a phrase like umpteen times in a book. And if you ran his stuff through one of those programs, they say this is too repetitive. Yeah.
No.
When he does it, it's brilliant. Yeah.
Anyway, anybody, any more questions?
Did any of your daughters follow in your footsteps? Are they any of them writers?
Well, my daughter who works for the government writes briefing notes. Right, her job, her job now is to read briefing notes, but she used to, as she says, her skill, if the zombie apocalypse comes, is that she will be able to write a really good memo telling people where to gather.
Yes.
So there's that.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And
We
no,
need those people.
Yes.
yeah, so no, none of my daughters seem to have any inclination towards writing or anything. One of them has 2 little kids, so she's got no time. But
Right.
yeah, so. But actually, my youngest daughter is right now on a 5-month trip around the world.
Oh, nice.
She's one as a paramedic in Toronto. She has one of those 4/5 or whatever they
Oh,
call it,
yes,
that she's
yeah.
got this time off. So she's keeping a blog, which is
Nice.
maybe that'll inspire her
Mhm.
to want to write about it.
Okay, well, thanks for coming out today.
Oh,
And
this has been wonderful.
This was a
I love
fun
this.
discussion and hopefully, there's one more Women Killing It. It's online. And oh shoot, I don't have the poster here to give you the details, but there is an online with 3 authors, one of whom is, I think they got Lisa Unger, didn't they?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, anyway, some really interesting authors, and if you just go to the library page, you can register for it's like an online panel, and that is. I can't pull up the date out of my head.
So you'll have to go
So
do
you'll
your
have
own
to go-
research.
yeah, do your homework, go to
Yeah.
the library page and find out when that is.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for that wonderful
Small
conversation.
but mighty group.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. A full room here.
There's so much going on. Busy.
I mean, people would pay to listen to you.
Well, we made mistakes, yeah.
Well, we do it. Great,
Just
thanks.